And here are people that deny that the Holocaust ever happened. We are still alive, those of us who were in concentration camps. We are getting older by the moment. At this point, I'm 86 years old. Okay, how many more years do we have until all of us die from this earth? Well, before the war, I grew up in Hungary, and we moved there because anti-Semitism was on the rise, and they were taking everything away from the Jews.
She was close with her family and they celebrated the Jewish holidays and they did Shabbat dinner. And so she just grew up in a community where she was proud to be Jewish.
So this is a family photo of my mom. She's the baby, and her brother, my Uncle Chaim, and her two parents.
She and her family were essentially expelled from their homes, like many other Jewish communities.
They were, abruptly told to leave all their belongings behind and come with us, as my grandma would always share with me.
When we arrived to Bergen-Belsen, my mother had a little blanket for me, and I was so tiny. When we were going through the gate, she put me in the blanket and held me like a baby. And they said, is the baby okay? And she said, yeah, she's just sleeping.
She, her brother, and mother were separated from her father at an early point in the war. And so at that point, she did not see her father again. And my understanding is that he was killed in a forced labor camp, according to someone who had been in the camp with him.
The camp was with barbed wires all around. And the section where the men stayed were all a big gate full of barbed wires. So you couldn't cross and meet each other.
There were no bathrooms in the barracks she was living in. There was a bucket, and that was incredibly dehumanizing. They were treated like animals.
And one day I saw a lady, we were near the toilets, crying. And I said to my mother, why is she crying? And my mother walked over to comfort her and said, why are you crying? She said, I looked down the hole. It was a hole in the ground and like a toilet, open. She said, I looked down into the toilet and my glasses fell into the toilet, into the hole. And it was a deep hole. You couldn't reach and pull it up. My mother understood it so well because she could not see without glasses. She also wore glasses all her life. And that memory kind of stuck with me forever, that episode of being so traumatized by losing your vision in a situation like that.
A man by the name of Rudolf Kostner, who had connections with Jewish organizations in Hungary and elsewhere, bartered with Adolf Eichmann, the so-called architect of the final solution to eradicate European Jewry, to essentially provide the Nazis with trucks and ammunition in exchange for about 16 to 1,700 Jews who he could release.
And are now referred to as Kostner's trains, to basically, stuff as many Jews into the cars as possible to liberate them from the concentration camps and the death camps that they were at.
If they had not been released, my grandmother believes that they would have been sent to Auschwitz, where she most likely would have been killed by the Nazis.
They allowed us into Switzerland, and we really went from hell to heaven. Unbelievable. They took us in to a beautiful hotel, and then later took the children up to the mountains to study and to recuperate and to heal. Well, eventually, the British allowed us into Palestine, and we arrived. And the Jewish organization in Israel at that time, Israel didn't exist yet. The Jewish organizations did their best, whatever they could offer, because we came with a knapsack on our back, just a change of clothing, and that's it. Nobody had anything.
So she lived there for several years on a kibbutz, away from her mother, which I believe was quite difficult for her at first, being away from her mom in the years after the war and the aftermath of that trauma.
For this little girl to be alone and to have to trust these adults without the language, the anxiety, the fear, the not knowing, it pains me. I want to like hug that little girl, tell her it's going to be okay.
In the middle of the night, they woke us up that Israel was established, that we have a country, and they brought us to the big dining room and they started dancing. I was 19 and a half years old when I was getting married, and my mother said, I have something to give you from our house in Hungary. I look at her like she fell out of the sky. What could you give me from Hungary?
Her mother took one of the mezuzot off the wall and she sewed the script of the mezuzah into the lining of her coat.
And this is the treasure that I received from my mother. And I said to my daughter, it's time for it to come to your house. And we put it here, and eventually it will go to her children.
She speaks in schools, and the Jewish Federation calls on her to talk to Jewish schools, non-Jewish schools, adults, children.
I think she's instilled just an immense Jewish pride within all of us.
Her telling us that story over time inspired us to grow a connection with our people and with our religion. She felt very strongly about sending her own kids to the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, to attending synagogue, raising them with bar and bat mitzvahs, and to growing a connection with Israel as well, which she feels very strongly about.
Never in a million years did I expect when I turned on the news and heard what was happening. Could be possible. And I called her immediately, and she was really upset, and everybody was trying to make sense of this.
I just feel for her, and I especially feel for her now because, you know, this has been the closest to the Holocaust that we as Jews have experienced, right, since then. And for her to have to live through that a second time it just pains me.
So I don't know why this hatred is going on. So we need to learn about it. We need to learn how to love.
Tata, I love you. I'm proud of you. Make sure that your story is spread for generations to come, and that never again really does mean never again.
How well do you think your kids and grandkids know your story?
I think they know it very well. They heard it more than once.
And that never again really does mean never again.
Wow.
Toda rabah. That's the biggest gift. That's the biggest gift that you could ever give me.